This video is brought to you by LootLocker, the indie game backend. Stick around to learn more about LootLocker later in this video. Ludum Dare, a worldwide game jam where thousands of game developers need to create a game in 72 hours or 48, based on a given theme. I myself had the chance of participating in one of these last year, but it's about time I take part in my second ever Ludum Dare. This year the theme was announced to be deeper and deeper. I initially wanted to create a game where the player needs to go down a deep cave or the depths of the ocean, but I needed something different, something more unique. And that's when I remembered that operating board game, where you have to remove bones from a body without triggering the metal. I thought of creating a surgery simulator style game, where the player needs to operate and perform different tasks in a surgery. And as the game progresses, the surgeries make the player go deeper and deeper. With that in mind, it was time to bring it to life. I spent the first 2 hours trying to make some models because I initially thought that it would be a good idea to make this into a 3D game. I got pretty inspired by the actual surgeon simulator game, which is in 3D, but I decided to scrap that idea. This is because I'm pretty bad at modeling and making 3D games. Plus, I have the time limit of 72 hours, and I would definitely not be able to finish this game if it was in 3D. Instead, I took out my Surface Pro and created some 2D assets. I ended up creating this background asset with the patient lying down, and also all of these organ parts that you will need to operate on. All of these items are separate layers so that I can easily set them up in Unity. I then switched to my PC and created a new Unity project. I imported a bunch of the created assets and set them up on the screen. So I initially wanted the player to have to remove body parts slowly without making the patient bleed out. But that idea didn't really suit my needs and I wasn't really sure how to make it. Plus, it's a total ripoff of Surgeon Simulator and I wanted it to be slightly more unique than that. So instead, the idea is that the player will have tasks in the top left. The taskbar will give you a list of different organs that you need to operate on. Essentially, you find the organ, you click it, and then you complete the task. And then you just make your way down the list. So I needed to think of different tasks related to organ parts. I made a list of different tasks and then created all the necessary art for them. Inside of Unity, I made an empty game object in the canvas and then called it whatever task it was. Inside of that, I set up all the art and the other UI parameters. It was time to make the logic. Now, the logic for every task is different, so I won't be going over the programming parts for every task, as that's kind of boring. But the first task I made was this one. Here the player simply needs to click the 6 ribs and break them, and once that is done, the task closes. This was handled in a very simple way. The task slides up and down with the use of Unity animations and triggers. To do the actual rib breaking, I created a button with just the rib sprite. And when that is pressed, this sprite will change to a broken rib asset and increase the rib's broken count. Once this count reaches 6, the task is complete and the task will slide down. I also wanted to make it easier for the player to know what to do, so I created an outline around the rib whenever it's hovered over. With this task created, it was time to move on to the next one. Next on my list was the heart task. This task requires the player to press the button 10 times. But this can't be too quick or slow, otherwise the task fails. All I did was have a button that once pressed increases a count. A timer mechanic is also running in the background to see at what rate the button is pressed. If this is too slow or fast, the task will be failed and a bit of text will appear indicating that, letting the player know if they need to speed up or slow down. And of course, once the task is complete, an animation will play, which makes the task slide down. At the end of day 1, I ended up creating 4 tasks in total. The heart and ribs as mentioned, but also a task where you have to clean some lungs with a sponge. And a task where you have to rotate the trachea. Overall, I think day 1 went great. I got a lot of the art created, but there is still a lot to do. At the start of day 2, I decided to try and complete all the tasks that are necessary for the game, so that on the last day I can work on the extra little details. Just like before, I started by creating all the art necessary for the tasks. This process took a long time because there was a lot of assets needed and a lot of trial and error. So at the end of the day, I was able to create all the tasks necessary, and I will show you them in a moment, but before we continue, this video is sponsored by LootLocker. LootLocker is the indie game backend that unlocks cross-platform game services so you can focus on making great games. If you're like me and you dream big, when making a game it often feels like there's features that are out of reach, because they're too complex or we don't have enough time to build them. Thankfully, LootLocker solves that. LootLocker comes packed with game systems that can easily be added to any game, like leaderboards, progressions, and collectibles. On top of that, LootLocker lets you create and manage game content like cosmetics, currencies, loot boxes, drop tables, and more. It also comes fully equipped with curations and moderation tools for user-generated content. Finally, LootLocker supports cross-platform player profiles, allowing your players to access the inventories and saved game files regardless on the platform that they are playing on. Save development time and launch your game with LootLocker at no cost. Check out the link in the description and create your free account today. So these are the tasks that I ended up making. An intestine task where you have to drag a biscuit from one end to the other while avoiding the walls. A liver task where you just have to slice through it. A kidney task where you have to refill them with water. A drag and drop pancreas task. And a stomach task where you pick up and drop food items into the stomach. So those were all the tasks needed for the game, and day 2 was complete. It was now day 3, the final day of the game jam, and there is a lot to do. The first thing I made was a timer. I needed to make sure that the player had a time limit on their surgeries, otherwise the game would be just too easy. On day 1, I created this blood bag sprite and decided to make that an indication of how much time the player has left. This bag would decrease as the timer goes down, and when it reaches 0, the player will lose. Talking about losing, I made this window appear when that happens. I added some animations to it and made it more polished, and it was now time to be able to win a surgery. So winning is quite simple. Essentially, when all the tasks are complete in a particular surgery, you'll be able to advance to the next one. So with that, I needed a system for displaying tasks. I created a little piece of paper that will display the user's tasks, and once the task is complete, the text will change and a sound effect will be played. I then just check if all tasks are completed, and if that is the case, this window will appear, telling the player that the surgery is done and display their time. With that, the game is now technically playable and has a game loop. Next up on the to-do list was to make some levels. I ended up only making 10 as the time was running out, and that seemed like a decent number anyway. I also created a level progression system. This basically means that you can't just play level 2 before completing the previous level, so in this case level 1 has to be completed before playing level 2, and so on. I set it up so levels unlock when you complete a particular surgery, and the level progression is in place now. Before trying to do any polish and cleaning up, I needed a main menu system. Now, I could have just set things up in separate scenes, but I wanted the game to have flow. So instead, I created a singular screen that would display different windows like options, level select, menu, and whatnot. And all I do is lerp the camera to different positions when needed. This makes the game feel a lot nicer and looks better overall. I ended up creating 5 different menu areas, the first being the title screen. This just displays, well, the title. The menu screen, which shows the player all the buttons they can press. The how to play screen, which tells the user how to play. The level select, which features all the levels. And the options menu. I figured having a settings page is pretty important, especially because I'm planning on adding music and sound to my games. So being able to control their volume in-game is pretty neat. Oh, I also made a post-processing option to turn it off or on. Finally, with all of that in place, it was time to add finishing touches. I added transitions between all scenes, but they ended up being slightly glitchy. I also created a flashing effect that occurs when you're low on time, but don't worry, it's slow and not too harsh. I added sound effects pretty much wherever possible, and added a few more details like animations and a custom cursor. So before finishing, I needed a way for the player to learn how to play the game itself. I personally know how to play it because I worked on it for 72 hours, but I can see that an outsider might be slightly confused on how the game works. Now, I have a how to play screen, but a lot of people skip past that, so I wanted something more interactive and something that will actually teach the player. So I made a tutorial level. This basically will play this cool animation that I created in Unity, showing you how to play the game. Oh, and also level 1 has these pointing arrows that kind of teach you how to play the level as well. So at this point, the game was finished. The last hour was just spent on playtesting and bug squashing, and then I created a Mac and Windows build. I would have created a Linux one too, but it just wouldn't compile for some reason, and I didn't have time to kind of test through that. But don't worry, I will get one out very soon once the voting process has finished. I set up a simple itch.io page and submitted the game. So that is the game. For anyone wanting to play it, I'll leave a link down below to the submission, and I would greatly appreciate it if you were to rate it. I also myself will be playing some games, so if you manage to submit something, drop a link down below in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Also, thanks to LootLocker for sponsoring this video. Check out the link in the description below to learn more and create your free account today. Finally, thank you to my patrons Smoking Vitar, TARDIS IT Guy, Atomic Punk, and Alan Z. I'll see you guys next time. Bye!